I'm telling you, that
This
man
ain't
keeps
normal.
coming around here. He's texting my daughter, taking her places. This ain't
Ma'am,
normal.
slow down. Right now, all I've got is a noise complaint and a car that already
Dude,
left.
she's 15. He's been buying her
Throwing
phones,
around
picking her up
serious
after that
accusations.
program.
At 6:47 p.m. on a Wednesday evening in Ocala, Florida, Officer Cedric Tate pulled his patrol car into the cracked parking lot of Pinewood Gardens, a low-income apartment complex on the city's southeast side. The dispatch had come in as a domestic disturbance, noise complaint, possible altercation. Cedric had handled dozens of calls at Pinewood before. Most ended with paperwork and nothing more. He stepped out, adjusted his vest, and activated his body cam. The red light blinked once and held steady. What he saw wasn't a fight. A teenage girl sat on the front steps of a ground floor unit, knees pulled to her chest, face buried in her arms. She was 15 years old. Her name was Kayla Simmons. Her mother, Rochelle Simmons, stood barefoot on the sidewalk, shouting at the taillights of a dark sedan pulling out of the lot. The car turned the corner and disappeared. Rochelle spun toward Cedric before he could speak. Her voice was raw. "That man has been coming around my daughter. He's been taking her places, buying her things, texting her at night." Cedric looked at Kayla. She didn't lift her head. "Ma'am, who are you referring to?" Rochelle's jaw tightened. "He's a cop. He works for your department. He runs some program with kids. That's how he found her." Cedric felt the shift in the air before his mind fully caught up. He looked at Kayla again. She still hadn't moved. The body cam on his chest kept recording, and somewhere behind the red blinking light, a chain of events had already begun that would reach far beyond this parking lot, far beyond this department, and into rooms where men in suits would eventually decide who kept their freedom and who lost it. Rochelle said the name without hesitation. Vincent Hargrove. Sergeant Vincent Hargrove. Cedric's stomach dropped. He knew exactly who that was. Every officer in the Ocala Police Department did. Hargrove was a 22-year veteran, white, broad-shouldered, with a handshake that lingered too long and a smile that showed up in every department newsletter and city press release. He ran the Youth Outreach Program, the one the mayor had praised at 3 consecutive budget hearings. He coached a community basketball league. He had a wall of commendation plaques in his office and a Rolodex of connections that stretched from City Hall to the state attorney's office. He was untouchable. And Rochelle Simmons had just accused him of grooming her 15-year-old daughter. Cedric crouched near the steps. "Kayla, can you tell me what happened?" Kayla didn't answer right away. Her fingers picked at the skin around her nails. Rochelle touched her shoulder. "Tell him, baby." It came out slowly, quietly. The body cam caught every word. "He started giving me rides home from the program. Then he started texting me. Then he bought me a phone. He said I was special. He said I couldn't tell anyone because they wouldn't understand." Her voice cracked. "Then he started touching me." Cedric stayed still. His training told him to keep the questions open. His instincts told him something else entirely. He knew what filing this report would mean. He knew whose name would be on it. And he knew that the moment that name entered the system, his own life inside the department would change in ways he couldn't take back. But the body cam was rolling, and a 15-year-old girl had just told him the truth. So he wrote it down. The next morning, Cedric walked into Lieutenant Craig Dunmore's office at 8:15 a.m. with the report printed, signed, and paper-clipped to a copy of his body cam log. Dunmore was 51, white, a career administrator who had spent more years behind a desk than on the street. He had a reputation for keeping things smooth, not for keeping things right. Cedric placed the report on the desk. Dunmore read it slowly. "You need to be very careful with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. You need to be very careful with accusations like this. This girl, she's 15. Kids that age get confused. They exaggerate. Sometimes they flat out lie for attention." "That doesn't change what she told me on camera," Cedric said. Dunmore's eyes narrowed slightly. "You recorded it?" "It's on my body cam. Standard activation." Dunmore exhaled through his nose, looked at the report again, looked at the name. Vincent Hargrove. He folded his hands. I'm going to give you some advice, officer. Not as your lieutenant, but as someone who's been here a long time. Don't go down this road. That girl's story hasn't been verified. Hargrove is a decorated sergeant with 2 decades of service. You start throwing his name around in a report like this, you're going to create problems you don't want. Cedric held his gaze. I'm not throwing anything around. I responded to a call. I documented what the victim told me. That's my job. Dunmore stared at him for a long moment. Then he picked up the report, placed it in a drawer, and closed it. I'll look into it. That's all for now. Cedric stood. He knew exactly what "I'll look into it" meant. It meant the drawer would stay closed, the report would go nowhere, and a 15-year-old girl would keep waiting for someone to believe her. The changes started within a week. Small at first, almost invisible. Cedric's regular day shift was reassigned without explanation. He was moved to the overnight rotation, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., covering the highest crime corridor in Ocala's southeast grid. When he asked a sergeant about it, the answer was short. Staffing needs. His locker, which had been in the main row near the briefing room for 4 years, was relocated to the far corner of the basement level. No reason given, no memo. Entered the break room. A patrol partner entered the break room. A patrol partner he'd ridden with for 2 years requested a reassignment without telling him. Cedric heard about it from someone else. Then came the union visit. A rep named Dale Prescott, a thick-necked white man with a shaved head and a permanent half-smile, cornered Cedric near the vending machines one night before shift. Just a friendly word, Prescott said, leaning against the wall. People are talking, Tate. You filed something that's making waves. I'd think real hard about your future here if I were you. Cedric looked at him. Are you threatening me? I'm advising you. There's a difference. Prescott walked away. Cedric stood there, alone, the fluorescent lights buzzing above him. And while all of this was happening, while the department quietly rearranged itself to push Cedric into a corner, Sergeant Vincent Hargrove continued his routine without interruption. He showed up to community basketball games. He posed for photos at a school assembly. He shook hands at a city council event where the mayor publicly thanked him for his dedication to Ocala's youth. His smile was wide, his uniform was pressed, and no one around him had any idea what was coming. 3 weeks after Cedric filed his report, Kayla Simmons stopped going to school. Her attendance, which had already been slipping, collapsed entirely. She wouldn't eat breakfast. She wouldn't leave her room. Rochelle found her one night sitting on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m., staring at the wall, holding her phone. When Rochelle took the phone and scrolled through the messages, her hands started shaking. There were texts from an unsaved number. The language was careful at first, then possessive, then explicit. Phrases no adult should ever send to a child. Instructions. Threats disguised as affection. You know what happens if you talk. I'm the only one who cares about you. Don't ruin this. Rochelle screenshotted everything. Then she called Cedric directly. She had kept his card from the night of the first visit. He answered on the second ring. Officer Tate, I've been calling the department for 2 weeks. Nobody's called me back. Nobody's come to talk to Kayla. Nobody's done anything. Cedric closed his eyes. He already knew. I filed the report, Ms. Simmons. I put it in my lieutenant's hands. She was crying now. Then why hasn't anyone come? Why is this man still out there? He's still texting her. He's still reaching her somehow. Cedric asked her to preserve the phone exactly as it was. Don't delete anything. Don't reply. Keep it somewhere safe. That night, after his shift, Cedric sat in his car in the department parking lot and pulled up his Bodycam log on the internal system. His footage from that Wednesday evening at Pinewood Gardens was still there. The report he had filed was listed as under review. It had not been assigned to a detective. No case number had been generated. No follow-up was logged. 3 weeks. A child had disclosed abuse on camera, and the system had done nothing. Cedric downloaded the footage to a personal drive. He copied the report. He saved the incident log. He stored all of it in a lockbox at his apartment. If the department was going to bury this, they were going to have to bury it without the evidence. Cedric didn't go looking for the second victim. She found him through a woman named Loretta Fay. Loretta ran a small nonprofit on the west side of Ocala called Bridge Forward, a mentorship and tutoring program for at-risk girls between the ages of 12 and 17. She had worked with the police department's youth outreach before, but had quietly pulled away 2 years earlier. She never said why publicly, but when Cedric reached out to her through a mutual contact at a community church, she agreed to meet him at a coffee shop off Silver Springs Boulevard. She was cautious. She didn't want her name in any report, but she had something to say. "You're not the first person to notice something wrong with Hargrove." Cedric set his cup down. "What do you mean?" 2 years ago, a girl in my program, 14 years old, told her mother that Hargrove had been taking her on drives after sessions, buying her clothes. The mother filed a complaint with Internal Affairs. Loretta paused. They told her the investigation found no evidence. Then they told her if she kept pressing it, they'd refer her daughter for making a false statement. The family moved to Georgia the next month. The girl's name was Amira Odom. Cedric wrote it down. That night, he searched for Amira's mother through public records. He found a phone number in Savannah. He called. A woman answered. When Cedric explained who he was and why he was calling, the line went quiet for a long time. Then she started crying. "Nobody believed us. They said my daughter was lying. They said she'd be the one in trouble. We left because we were afraid." Cedric told her she wasn't alone anymore. He told her that another girl had come forward, and that this time, someone was listening. He didn't tell her that the someone was just one officer with a copied Bodycam file and no backup from the department that employed him. He didn't tell her that he was running out of people to trust. He just told her the truth would come out. And for the first time since he had filed that report, he felt the weight of a promise he wasn't entirely sure he could keep. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Cedric was told to report to the administrative wing at 10 a.m. No explanation, no context, just a time and a room number. When he arrived, Lieutenant Craig Dunmore was seated at one end of a long table. Beside him sat Captain Frank Sorrento, the precinct commander, a man Cedric had spoken to maybe 3 times in 6 years. Sorrento was 56, white, with a military haircut and a face that never seemed to move. He had run the precinct for 9 years and had a reputation for loyalty, not to the law, but to the department's image. "Sit down, Tate." Cedric sat. Sorrento opened a manila folder. "Officer Tate, we've received a complaint from the evidence unit regarding your handling of materials in a narcotics case from last quarter. There are discrepancies in the chain of custody that need to be addressed." Cedric's jaw tightened. He had never mishandled anything in his career. His record was clean. What discrepancies? "We'll get into that," Sorrento said. "For now, you're being placed on administrative desk duty pending an internal review. We'll also need your body cam returned for recalibration." Cedric looked at Dunmore. Dunmore didn't look back. "This is about the report I filed," Cedric said. Sorrento's expression didn't change. "This is about evidence handling, nothing more." Cedric stood slowly. He unclipped his body cam from his vest and placed it on the table. But he didn't panic, because 2 weeks earlier, sitting in his apartment at 1 a.m. with the blinds drawn, he had copied every file that mattered. The footage, the report, the incident log, the screenshots Rochelle had sent him of Kayla's messages. All of it was in a lockbox that no one in the department knew existed. That afternoon, Cedric made a phone call he had been hoping he would never need to make. Nadira Qureshi answered on the third ring. She was a civil rights attorney based in Jacksonville, sharp, relentless, and known across Florida for taking cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. Cedric told her everything. When he finished, the line was quiet for a moment. Then Nadira said 3 words that changed the trajectory of everything. "We go federal." 2 days later, Cedric sat in a windowless conference room on the 4th floor of the FBI field office in Jacksonville. Across from him were 2 agents from the Public Corruption Unit, Special Agent Rena Castillo and Special Agent Tom Brierly. Nadira sat beside him, a legal pad already half full of notes. Cedric laid it all out. The call at Pinewood Gardens, Kayla's disclosure on his body cam, the report he filed with Dunmore, the silence that followed, Rochelle's calls to the department that were never returned, the messages on Kayla's phone, the second victim, Amira Odom, whose family had been pressured into retracting their complaint and fleeing the state. The sudden reassignment to overnight shifts, the locker move, the union warning, and finally, the fabricated internal investigation designed to strip him of his body cam and push him out. Castillo listened without interrupting. When Cedric finished, she asked one question. "Do you have the footage?" "Yes," Cedric said. "Every second of it." He handed over the drive. Castillo inserted it into a secure laptop. The room went silent as Kayla's voice filled the speakers. Small, shaking, 15 years old, describing things no child should ever have to describe. When the playback ended, Brierly looked at Castillo. She nodded once. Within 48 hours, the FBI opened a formal federal investigation into Sergeant Vincent Hargrove and the Ocala Police Department. Agents began pulling Hargrove's phone records, financial statements, and department communications under sealed warrants. What they found went further than even Cedric had feared. Hargrove had been in contact with at least 5 minors outside any official program capacity. Late-night calls, prepaid phones, cash withdrawals of $200 and $300 at a time, all coinciding with dates the outreach program held evening sessions. The pattern was methodical, practiced, and it had been going on for years. Cedric drove back to Ocala that evening in silence. His hands gripped the wheel. The streetlights blurred past. He had done what the department refused to do. He had taken it outside the walls. And now, for the first time since that Wednesday night at Pinewood Gardens, he felt something shift beneath the surface. Not relief, not safety, but the slow turning of a machine far bigger and far more unforgiving than the one that had tried to silence him. The retaliation accelerated. Internal Affairs formally charged Cedric with conduct unbecoming an officer, then added a second allegation: unauthorized duplication and removal of department property. Someone had checked the download logs. They knew he'd copied the Bodycam footage. Dunmore called him in. Door closed. "You made copies of department footage without authorization. That's a terminable offense." "I copied evidence of a crime that was reported and ignored," Cedric replied. Dunmore leaned forward. "Return every copy, every file, every drive." "That's not going to happen. Talk to my attorney." He walked out. That afternoon, Nadira Qureshi filed a federal whistleblower protection motion in the Middle District of Florida, arguing the footage was material evidence in an active federal investigation and that any attempt to seize or destroy it constituted obstruction. Judge Evelyn Cortez issued a temporary restraining order within 24 hours. The department was prohibited from disciplining Cedric or destroying any body cam recordings. The order landed on Sorrento's desk like a grenade. He called Dunmore. "They've got a federal judge involved. How far did this go?" Dunmore didn't answer. Meanwhile, word reached Hargrove through a friend inside the department. The feds were asking questions. That night, Hargrove sat in his kitchen and snapped a prepaid phone in half. He drove to a gas station and threw the pieces into a dumpster. He deleted messages from a second device and wiped an email account he thought no one knew about. What he didn't know was that the FBI had already obtained everything through sealed warrants 2 weeks earlier. Every text, every call log, every transaction. The evidence he was trying to destroy had already been copied, cataloged, and stored in a federal evidence locker in Jacksonville. He was erasing ghosts. The originals were already gone. The FBI didn't need the story to go public. They needed it to go deeper. Without any press coverage, agents quietly interviewed families connected to the youth outreach program across Ocala and Marion County. 3 more families came forward within 2 weeks. The first was Gwendolyn Pratt. Her daughter, 13 at the time, had been paired with Hargrove through the mentorship track. The rides home started within a month. then gifts, a tablet, a prepaid phone. When the girl started pulling away, skipping meals, flinching at loud noises, Gwendolyn confronted her. The girl broke down. Gwendolyn went to the police. She sat in the lobby for 2 hours. A week later, a detective told her the investigation found insufficient evidence. No one had interviewed her daughter. The second family described an identical pattern. When the mother confronted Hargrove at a community event, he showed up at her apartment the next day in full uniform. He stood in her doorway and told her that making false accusations against a police officer was a felony. She never filed a report. The third family had gone to internal affairs 2 full years before Amira Odom's case. Their complaint was logged, assigned a number, and closed within 11 days. No interviews, no evidence collected. Disposition, unsubstantiated. The FBI now had 5 victims spanning nearly a decade. 5 families who had tried to sound the alarm. 5 times the department had shut it down. Cedric was brought back to Jacksonville for a 4-hour deposition. At the end, Castillo closed her file. Your Bodycam footage is the single most important piece of evidence in this case. The first time a disclosure was captured in real time on a responding officer's own device. She paused. We're going to make sure it counts. Cedric nodded. He drove home with the windows down and the radio off. The weight hadn't lifted, but for the first time, it had shifted to somewhere it belonged. The arrest came at 5 a.m. on a Wednesday. FBI agents moved simultaneously across 3 locations. At his home on the north side of Ocala, Sergeant Vincent Hargrove was pulled from his bed in boxer shorts and an undershirt. He stood blinking under the porch light as agents cuffed him in front of neighbors who had already stepped outside at the sound of the vehicles. He was charged with multiple federal counts, including sexual exploitation of minors, coercion under color of authority, and civil rights violations. At the precinct, Lieutenant Craig Dunmore was escorted out of his office in full view of the morning shift. Officers stood frozen in the hallway as federal agents walked him past the briefing room in handcuffs. He was charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy to deprive civil rights for burying Cedric's report and orchestrating retaliation against him. Captain Frank Sorrento was arrested at his home. Conspiracy. Failure to act on mandatory reporting obligations. The police chief was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Only now did the story break. Local news ran the arrests before noon. By evening, it was statewide. The details hit the public like a wall. A police sergeant running a youth program. 5 victims. A decade of abuse. A department that knew and did nothing. Protests gathered outside the Ocala Police Department by nightfall. The mayor held a press conference distancing himself from Hargrove, despite appearing beside him in promotional photos for the outreach program just 4 months earlier. He called the allegations deeply disturbing and promised full cooperation with federal authorities. Cedric watched the coverage from his apartment, alone, the television light flickering against the walls. He saw Hargrove's booking photo. He saw Dunmore's name on the screen. He saw the precinct he had worked in for 6 years, surrounded by people demanding answers. He didn't feel relief. He didn't feel victory. He felt the quiet, heavy truth that everything he had endured, the isolation, the threats, the fabricated charges, had led to this single evening, and that it had almost not happened at all. The federal trial began 4 months later in the United States District Court for the Middle District of Florida. The courtroom was packed from the first morning. Prosecutors opened with Cedric's body cam footage. The recording played on 2 large monitors facing the jury. 12 people sat in silence as a 15-year-old girl's voice filled the room. Small, shaking, describing what a man with a badge had done to her over the course of 5 months. The footage was unedited. 14 minutes of Kayla Simmons sitting on concrete steps, pulling at her sleeves, unable to look at the camera. Rochelle standing behind her, arms crossed, tears running down her face. And Cedric's voice, steady and careful, asking the questions that no one else in his department had been willing to ask. When the footage ended, no one in the courtroom moved. Kayla testified behind a screen. Her voice was older now, harder, but it cracked in the same places. Amira Odom's mother testified via video link from Georgia, weeping as she described how the department had threatened her family into silence. 3 other victims gave statements. The evidence was overwhelming. Phone records, financial trails, prepaid devices, cash withdrawals matching outreach session dates. Then the prosecutors read the emails. One from Dunmore to a staff sergeant, instructing him to slow walk the Tate report and keep it off the weekly log. Another from Sorrento to Dunmore, written 11 days after Cedric filed his complaint. The words appeared on the courtroom monitors in black and white. Hargrove is too valuable to lose over teenage drama. Let it die quietly. The phrase hung in the air like smoke. Dunmore and Sorrento, now cooperating for reduced sentences, each pointed the finger at the other and at Hargrove. The jury watched both men minimize their roles while the evidence proved they had actively shielded a predator. Hargrove's defense tried to discredit the victims. It didn't work. The footage existed. The records existed. The pattern was undeniable. The jury deliberated for 1 day. When they returned, the foreperson didn't look at the defense table. That told everyone in the courtroom what was coming. Guilty. On every count. The courtroom exhaled. Rochelle Simmons pressed both hands to her mouth. 2 other mothers held each other in the second row. Cedric sat in the back, in civilian clothes, his hands folded in his lap. He didn't move. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. The courtroom was standing room only. Judge Evelyn Cortez, the same judge who had issued the restraining order protecting Cedric's footage months earlier, presided. She addressed Hargrove directly. You were given a badge and a program designed to protect children. You used both as a hunting ground. You identified vulnerable girls. You isolated them. You abused them. And when they tried to speak, the men around you made sure no one listened. Hargrove stood motionless. His attorney had advised him to show remorse. He showed nothing. The judge continued. The officers who shielded you are not bystanders. They are participants. This court holds them accountable not because they pulled the trigger, but because they handed you the weapon and looked away while you used it. She sentenced Hargrove to 63 years in federal prison, effectively a life sentence. He would die behind bars. Dunmore received 12 years for obstruction and conspiracy. Sorrento received 8. 2 additional officers who had been aware of prior complaints and failed to act received lesser sentences. A sketch artist in the front row captured Hargrove's face as the number was read. His expression was blank. His eyes were fixed on the table. He did not look at the families. He did not look at anyone. Kayla was not in the courtroom. She had asked not to be. But Rochelle was there. And when the judge's gavel came down, Rochelle closed her eyes, lowered her head, and whispered something no microphone picked up. Only she and God knew what it was. The fallout moved fast. Within weeks, the city of Ocala entered a federal consent decree. The entire youth outreach program was dissolved. Not restructured, not reformed, dissolved. A new program would be built from the ground up under civilian oversight with independent background checks, mandatory reporting protocols, and a review board with subpoena power. The police chief resigned without a public statement. His office was cleared within 48 hours. A civil lawsuit filed by the families of all 5 victims named the city, the department, and the individual officers. The case never went to trial. The city settled for a multi-million-dollar sum that legal observers described as one of the largest police misconduct payouts in Central Florida history. As part of the agreement, the department was required to release all internal affairs records related to complaints against Hargrove. What came out was staggering. 14 complaints spanning 9 years. 14 families who had come forward in some way. Not one resulted in meaningful action. Cedric was reinstated with full back pay and a formal letter clearing him of all internal charges. The fabricated evidence handling complaint was expunged from his record. But the damage was already done. 6 months of isolation, threats, a career weaponized against him for doing his job. He requested a transfer and was accepted by the Marion County Sheriff's Office. He reported to his new post on a Monday morning. New badge, new unit, same body cam. Nadira Qureshi used the case as a foundation. She filed civil rights suits on behalf of 3 other officers across Florida who had faced retaliation for reporting misconduct. Each case cited Cedric's as precedent. Each one moved forward. The system hadn't worked on its own. It had been forced to work, dragged into accountability by one officer who refused to close his eyes and one attorney who knew exactly which doors to kick open. Months later, Cedric Tate agreed to a single interview. He sat across from a journalist in a quiet room at the Marion County Sheriff's Office. Still in uniform, body cam clipped to his vest. He spoke slowly, carefully, the way he always did. People ask me if I'd do it again. He paused. I think about that question more than I should, because the honest answer is it almost broke me. He described the loneliness, the overnight shifts in silence, the locker moved to the basement, the officers who turned their backs, the union rep who told him to think about his future. The morning Sorrento and Dunmore sat across from him and tried to take the one piece of evidence that mattered. I wasn't brave, Cedric said. I was terrified. Every single day. I just kept thinking about that girl on the steps, 15 years old, telling me the truth because she thought someone would finally do something. He looked down at his hands. If I had walked away from that, I wouldn't be able to wear this uniform. I wouldn't deserve to. He talked about Amira, the girl whose family had been run out of the state, the complaint that was buried years before Kayla ever sat on those steps. She never got justice the first time, Cedric said. That stays with me. He said the system didn't work. People made it work. By refusing to look away, by keeping copies when they were told to delete, by walking into federal offices when their own department shut the door. The interview ended quietly. No dramatic statement, no rehearsed closing line. Just a man in uniform who had done what the men above him refused to do, and paid for it in ways most people would never see. The piece closes with Cedric walking through the Marion County Sheriff's Office at the start of a new shift. Body cam on, red light steady. He steps into his patrol car, adjusts his mirror, and pulls out of the lot. The narrator's voice returns. Vincent Hargrove will die in federal prison. The officers who protected him lost their badges, their freedom, and their names. And a 15-year-old girl's trembling voice on a body cam recording, footage that was nearly seized, nearly buried, nearly erased, brought down an entire chain of command. Not because the system worked, because one man wouldn't let it fail. If you think this situation was bad, wait until you see what happens in the case on the right-hand side.
So I stopped you for the damaged taillight. I also need clarification about your relationship with the minors in the vehicle.
They're family friends. I'm driving them home, that's all.
One of them said you're not his father. They're scared, sitting in silence while you're ordering them to stay quiet.
You're playing with fire, deputy. You don't understand.
At 11:47 p.m. on a dark stretch of Highway 9 outside Crestfield, Georgia, a 29-year-old patrol deputy named Vanessa Cordero activated her lights behind a black Lincoln Continental drifting between lanes with a broken taillight. She expected nothing. A routine stop on a quiet overnight shift covering for a colleague on leave. The kind of call that usually ended with a warning and a wave. It didn't. The driver lowered his window slowly, already holding his license between 2 fingers, like a man who had done this before and never had to explain himself. He was well-dressed, calm, controlled. He identified himself before she could finish her opening line. Judge Clarence Devereaux, presiding judge of the 14th District Family Court. His voice carried authority, even on the shoulder of a county road at midnight. He told her the taillight had been an ongoing issue, that he was heading home from a family function, and that she could let this one go. Cordero noted the tone. Not a request, an instruction. She kept her flashlight steady and moved it past the driver's seat toward the back of the vehicle. 4 children sat in the back, ages roughly 6 to 11. None of them moved. None of them spoke. Their eyes stayed low, fixed on their laps or the seat in front of them. One of them, a small girl in the rear passenger seat, was trembling visibly. Her hands were pressed flat between her knees. Cordero's training told her to note the detail and continue the stop. She did. She asked for registration. Devereaux handed it over without a word, his eyes watching her in the side mirror. She stepped back toward her cruiser, Bodycam recording, flashlight beam cutting across the dark interior of the Lincoln one more time. That was when a boy sitting behind the driver's seat turned his head slowly and looked directly into the lens mounted on her chest. His lips barely moved. "That's not my dad." Judge Clarence Devereaux was 58 years old and had spent 22 of those years on the bench of the 14th District Family Court in Crestfield, Georgia. He was not just a judge in that town, he was an institution. His name appeared on the donor walls of 3 local nonprofits. He gave the keynote address at the county's annual Foster Care Appreciation Dinner every year for over a decade. He had been profiled twice by the Crestfield Herald as a pillar of justice and compassion, a man who had dedicated his career to protecting the most vulnerable children in the system. He ran a mentorship program for youth aging out of foster care, personally selecting participants and meeting with them regularly in his chambers. Local attorneys spoke about him with a mix of respect and caution. His courtroom was strict, his rulings were final, and his influence over custody placements, foster assignments, and juvenile case outcomes was nearly absolute. But beneath the accolades and the authority, there were things people noticed and never said aloud. Court clerks who saw certain children brought to his chambers outside of scheduled hearings. Social workers who were told specific children needed to be placed in homes Devereaux personally recommended. A bailiff who once saw a child leave the judge's office in tears and was told it was a difficult custody conversation. None of it was ever reported. None of it was ever questioned. The attorneys who practiced before him needed his favor. The social workers depended on his rulings. The community trusted his image. And Devereaux had spent 2 decades making sure that image never cracked. Until a deputy on a quiet highway asked the wrong question at the right time, and a boy in the back seat answered it. Officer Vanessa Cordero had never been the type to back down from authority. She was the daughter of a Guatemalan mechanic and a Dominican home health aide who raised 3 children in a 2-bedroom apartment in Macon. She joined the Harmon County Sheriff's Office at 24, not because she came from a law enforcement family, but because of her cousin Sophia. Sophia had been placed in foster care at age 9 and bounced through 4 homes in 2 years. She came back different. Quiet in a way that wasn't shyness. Cordero never got the full story. She didn't need to. She understood that the system had failed someone she loved, and she decided she would never be the person who looked the other way when something felt wrong. In 5 years on the job, she had built a reputation that made some colleagues uncomfortable. She once cited a county commissioner for DUI on a back road outside Harmon and refused to void the ticket when his chief of staff called the station. She filed a formal report on a fellow deputy who had roughed up a teenager during a traffic stop, even after being told it would make her unpopular. Her sergeant once described her in a performance review as someone who doesn't care about your title, just your behavior. It was meant as a compliment. Not everyone took it that way. That night, she was working a solo overnight shift on Highway 9. 12 hours, mostly silence, mostly empty road. She had pulled over 2 vehicles before the Lincoln. Both were routine. Both ended in under 5 minutes. When she saw the Continental drifting across the center line with a busted taillight, she expected the same. A warning, a signature, a good night. What she got instead was a man who told her who he was before she asked. 4 children who sat like statues, and a whisper from the back seat that made every nerve in her body fire at once. She didn't drive away from it. She called it in. Cordero walked back to the Lincoln and positioned herself at the rear passenger window. Her flashlight moved across the back seat slowly. The 4 children hadn't shifted since she first approached. The 2 boys sat behind the driver and front passenger seats. The older girl, roughly 11, sat in the middle. The younger girl, the one who had been trembling, was pressed against the far door. Cordero leaned slightly and spoke in a voice low enough that Devereaux would have had to strain to hear. "Hey, you kids doing okay back there?" No one answered. The older girl's eyes flicked toward the driver's seat and then back down. The younger girl's hands were still pressed between her knees. The boy who had whispered moments earlier stared straight ahead now, jaw tight, as if he regretted what he had said. Devereaux's voice came from the front. "Officer, they're tired. It's late. I'm transporting them home from a family gathering. They're foster children in my care." Cordero didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the children. "Do you have paperwork for them? Foster documentation, custody orders, anything with their names?" Devereaux paused for half a second. "Not on me. It's at my home. I'm a family court judge, officer. I don't carry case files in my vehicle." Cordero straightened. She noted the details her training told her to catalog. No seatbelts properly fastened on 3 of the 4 children. The younger girl was not wearing shoes. No booster seat for the smallest child. No documentation of any kind for 4 minors in a vehicle with an unrelated adult approaching midnight. She keyed her radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 17. I need a second unit to my location on Highway 9, mile marker 41. I have a welfare concern involving 4 minors." Devereaux's tone changed. "That's not necessary. I've told you who I am. You can verify it with 1 phone call." Cordero met his eyes through the window. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to stay in the vehicle. I've requested backup. We'll sort this out when they arrive." Devereaux stared at her for a long moment. Then he said something the Bodycam captured with perfect clarity. "You have no idea what you're doing, Deputy. You're going to regret this." Devereaux didn't wait for backup. He pulled out his phone, scrolled with the casual ease of a man who had powerful people on speed dial, and pressed call. Cordero watched from behind the vehicle, Bodycam recording. Her microphone picked up fragments. His tone shifted from calm to firm. The words "Patrol Deputy," "Highway 9," and "handled immediately" came through clearly. Within 2 minutes, her radio crackled. Sergeant Ray Loomis, her shift supervisor. "Vanessa, what's your status on Highway 9? She responded, "Welfare concern, 4 minors, no documentation. 1 child made a statement. I've requested backup." A pause. Then Loomis's voice dropped lower. "Listen, the driver is Judge Devereaux. He's known to the department. He sits on the County Public Safety Board. You might want to extend professional courtesy and let him get those kids home." Cordero stared at the Lincoln's rear window. She could see the outline of the older girl's head, motionless. She keyed the radio. "Sergeant, a child told me the driver is not his father. I have 4 minors with no documentation, no proper restraints, approaching midnight. I'm not releasing this vehicle until backup confirms the welfare of these children." Silence. Then Loomis came back. "Copy. Backup en route." Inside the Lincoln, Devereaux adjusted his rearview mirror. The Bodycam caught the reflection. He was watching the children. The older girl had her hand on the younger one's knee. The boy who had whispered sat rigid, staring straight ahead. Devereaux's expression was composed, but something had shifted behind his eyes. The confidence was still there, but alongside it sat something sharper. He turned slightly toward the back seat and spoke. The microphone picked up only part of it, but digital enhancement during the investigation would later recover the full sentence. "Remember what I told you, not a word." Deputy Terrence Kamal arrived 11 minutes later. He stepped out slowly and walked toward Cordero with the expression of someone who already knew this was complicated. She briefed him in a low voice. Broken taillight, erratic driving, 4 children, no documentation, no shoes on the youngest, a child's whisper, and a driver who identified himself as a sitting judge before she'd asked his name. Kamal listened with his arms crossed. "I know who he is, Vanessa. He's been at department dinners. The sheriff shakes his hand at the courthouse Christmas reception." Cordero didn't blink. "Then you understand why this has to be done right." Kamal looked at the Lincoln, at the dark shapes in the back seat, at the man behind the wheel. "What do you want to do?" She told him. "Ask Devereaux to step out. Request documentation." If he couldn't produce any, they were calling Child Protective Services and a forensic child advocacy officer. Kamal exhaled. "You know what happens if we're wrong." Cordero's response was immediate. "You know what happens if we're right and we drive away." He nodded once. They walked to the Lincoln together. Cordero tapped the window. "Judge Devereaux, I'm asking you to step out of the vehicle." He opened the door slowly, straightening his jacket as he stood. His posture was controlled, expression flat. "This is a mistake," he said. "A serious mistake." Cordero replied without hesitation. "Sir, do you have any legal documentation authorizing you to transport these children?" His silence lasted 3 full seconds. The Bodycam counted them. "I don't have to explain myself to a patrol deputy. I am a judge of the family court. Those children are under my supervision through a mentorship program I personally administer." Cordero asked one more time. "Paperwork? Names? Case numbers?" He had nothing. Cordero called Child Protective Services at 12:23 a.m. A forensic child advocacy officer named Imani Sutton arrived at the Harmon County Fire Station 40 minutes later. The children were transported separately from Devereaux and brought inside one at a time. Sutton was trained for this. Soft voice, open posture, no uniforms in the room. She started with the boy who had spoken on the highway. His name was Terrell. He was 8 years old. He had been in the foster system since age 4. He told Sutton he was taken from his group home 3 days earlier by a woman he didn't know who said he was going to a special family visit. He said the man in the car told him to call him Sir. He said they stayed in a house with no other adults. He said he didn't want to go back. Sutton moved to the oldest girl, 11 years old. Her name was Kiara. She didn't speak at first. She sat with her arms wrapped around herself, eyes on the floor. When Sutton asked if she had been to the man's house before, Kiara nodded slowly. "How many times?" Kiara held up 4 fingers. Sutton asked what happened there. Kiara used language that triggered mandatory reporting protocols immediately. A 6-year-old boy in the 3rd interview barely spoke at all. He flinched when a male firefighter walked past the open door. The 4th child, a 7-year-old girl named Amara, didn't answer questions directly. Sutton gave her crayons and paper. She drew a picture of a room with no windows and a large bed. She drew a tall figure standing next to it. Sutton stepped out of the room, closed the door behind her, and called the district attorney's office. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "We need a warrant tonight." A judge from the neighboring district was woken at 2:41 a.m. to sign the warrant. No one in Crestfield's court system could be involved. By 4:15 a.m., a team of investigators from the Harmon County Sheriff's Office and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation entered Devereaux's residence, a well-kept colonial on a tree-lined street in the town's wealthiest neighborhood. The front rooms looked normal. Family photos on the mantel, legal texts on the shelves, awards and framed newspaper clippings on the study wall. The basement told a different story. Behind a locked interior door, investigators found a furnished room with bedding for multiple children, small clothing folded in stacks, personal items belonging to minors, electronic devices concealed in a floor safe, and a ledger-style notebook with entries spanning years, each referencing children by initials, dates, and coded notations that investigators would later decipher with the help of child exploitation analysts. Digital forensics was called in before sunrise. The scope of the investigation expanded within hours. Devereaux was arrested at the scene. He was still wearing the suit from the traffic stop. He said nothing when they put him in handcuffs. His attorney arrived within the hour, demanded to know the charges, and was handed a warrant that ran 4 pages. Outside, the first light of morning broke across Crestfield. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as a man they had admired for 2 decades was guided into the back of a federal vehicle. None of them spoke. None of them yet understood what had been happening inside that house. But the children did. And now, finally, someone had listened. The investigation into how Devereaux operated moved fast once investigators understood what they were looking at. He hadn't acted on impulse. He had built a system. As presiding judge of the 14th District Family Court, Devereaux had direct authority over custody placements, foster assignments, and juvenile case outcomes. For over a decade, he had used that power to position himself as the final word on where vulnerable children ended up. He cultivated relationships with specific social workers who processed his recommendations without question. He maintained ties to 2 group home administrators who flagged children with no stable family connections, the ones least likely to be missed or believed. His mentorship program, celebrated publicly as a model of judicial compassion, served as the pipeline. Children selected for the program were brought to his chambers for meetings that no one supervised. Some were assigned to foster homes connected to people he controlled. Court records later showed that Devereaux had personally intervened in the placement of at least 19 children over 7 years, overriding caseworker recommendations in 12 of those instances. Each time, the reassignment moved the child closer to his reach. The social workers who facilitated it fell into 2 categories. Some were manipulated, pressured by the authority of a judge they couldn't afford to cross. Others knew. They looked the other way because Devereaux controlled their caseloads, their courtroom outcomes, and in some cases, their careers. One social worker would later testify that she had raised the concern once and was told by her supervisor to drop it. The supervisor's explanation was brief. "He's a judge. You're not." That was the end of it. When news of Devereaux's arrest reached the Crestfield legal community, the silence was immediate and telling. Attorneys who had practiced before him for years offered no comment. 2 social workers connected to his cases were placed on administrative leave within 48 hours. The director of the county's child welfare office submitted a resignation letter with no public explanation. A local journalist named Franklin Cobb, who had twice profiled Devereaux as a community hero, began receiving anonymous tips within days. Former court staff, foster parents, a retired bailiff who said he once saw a child leave the judge's chambers crying and was told not to ask about it. Cobb published his first investigative piece within 2 weeks. It detailed 3 formal complaints filed against Devereaux over the previous decade with the state's Judicial Conduct Board. All 3 had been dismissed after what the board described as preliminary review. One of the complainants was a foster mother named Gloria Vance. She had reported concerns about a child's behavior after visits connected to the mentorship program. She described nightmares, withdrawal, language that alarmed her. She was told she was being alarmist. 6 months later, her foster license was revoked on a paperwork technicality. She lost custody of 2 children she had been raising for 3 years. Vance told Cobb she had always believed the revocation was retaliation. Now, reading the charges against Devereaux, she was certain. The system didn't fail those children by accident, she said. It failed them because it protected him. When the article ran, the Judicial Conduct Board issued a statement announcing an internal review. By then, the FBI was already in Crestfield. The FBI and Department of Justice opened a joint federal investigation 9 days after the traffic stop. What began as a single incident on Highway 9 had expanded into something the U.S. Attorney's Office described internally as systemic and predatory. Federal agents seized Devereaux's electronic devices, court records, personal correspondence, and financial statements. Digital forensics uncovered encrypted files and communications with individuals in 2 neighboring states. Financial records showed a pattern of payments to the group home administrators who had funneled children into placements Devereaux controlled. The money was structured in small amounts, routed through a nonprofit Devereaux had established under the umbrella of his mentorship program. On paper, the funds were labeled as youth enrichment grants. In practice, they were payments for access. Federal prosecutors convened a grand jury within 3 weeks. The indictment, when it came, was 34 counts: trafficking, exploitation, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, wire fraud connected to the nonprofit, civil rights violations under color of law. 2 social workers and 1 group home administrator were named as co-conspirators. Devereaux was denied bail. His attorney, a high-profile defense lawyer from Atlanta, called it a rush to judgment driven by media pressure. The U.S. attorney held a brief press conference outside the federal courthouse. She stood behind a podium with no notes and spoke directly into the cameras. "This office has investigated many cases involving abuse of power. This is among the most disturbing. A sitting judge used the institution designed to protect children as a tool to exploit them. We will pursue accountability at every level. Devereaux watched the press conference from a federal holding facility on a wall-mounted television. According to a corrections officer who was present, he showed no reaction. He sat with his hands folded, expression blank, staring at the screen as if watching someone else's life collapse. The federal trial began 4 months later and lasted 5 weeks. The courtroom was full every day. Prosecutors opened with the Bodycam footage from Highway 9. The jury watched in silence as the Lincoln Continental rolled to a stop on the dark shoulder. They heard Cordero's voice, calm and professional. They saw the children's faces illuminated briefly by her flashlight. And they heard the boys whisper, "That's not my dad." Several jurors looked down. One pressed a hand to her mouth. The prosecution then built its case methodically. Forensic evidence from the residents, testimony from child psychologists who had evaluated the victims, digital evidence extracted from encrypted files, financial records mapping payments to co-conspirators, and the testimony of the children themselves, delivered via closed-circuit video so they would not have to face the man who had hurt them. 8 victims were identified in total, spanning 7 years. Each child had entered Devereaux's orbit through the family court system he controlled. Each had been selected for his mentorship program. Each had been placed in homes or facilities connected to people who answered to him. The defense attempted every available angle. They argued the children's testimony had been riven. The judge ruled the broken taillight and erratic driving provided clear, probable cause. They argued the children's testimony had been coached. Prosecution experts dismantled the claim, with forensic interview recordings showing open-ended, non-leading questioning. They claimed the digital evidence was circumstantial. Federal analysts walked the jury through file structures, timestamps, and encryption methods that proved deliberate concealment. A cooperating social worker took the stand and described in detail how Devereaux selected children and how she was too afraid of his power to refuse. Her voice broke once. She did not ask for sympathy. The jury gave her none. The jury deliberated for 1 day. Guilty on all 34 counts. The courtroom was still when the verdict was read. No gasps, no outbursts, just silence and the sound of the court clerk's voice moving through each count, one after another, the word guilty repeating like a hammer on stone. Devereaux sat motionless, hands flat on the table, eyes forward. His attorney closed his folder and said nothing. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. A senior federal judge was brought in from out of state to preside. Before the sentence was delivered, 3 of the older victims submitted impact statements. One was read aloud by a prosecutor because the victim could not speak without breaking down. The statement described years of abuse by someone the system told them to trust. Someone who wore a robe and sat above everyone else in the room. Someone who decided where children went and who they belonged to. The sentencing judge addressed Devereaux directly. You were entrusted with the most sacred responsibility the legal system can offer, the protection of children who had no one else to speak for them. You weaponized that trust. You used the institution designed to shield the most vulnerable members of this society as your personal instrument of predation. There is no sentence this court can impose that fully accounts for what you have taken from these children. Devereaux was sentenced to 67 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. He showed no visible emotion. At 58 years old, the sentence was effectively life. He was led from the courtroom in shackles, past the families of victims, past the journalists, past the cameras. He did not look at anyone. The door closed behind him. His robe, his title, his reputation, his freedom. All of it gone. The fallout reshaped Crestfield from the inside out. The State Judicial Conduct Board was restructured after an independent audit revealed systemic failures in handling complaints against sitting judges. 3 board members resigned. New legislation was introduced requiring independent oversight of all family court placements and mandatory cross-referencing of judicial involvement in foster care assignments. The county's child welfare department was placed under state supervision for a minimum of 5 years. Internal emails uncovered during the federal investigation showed that supervisors within the department had been aware of irregularities in Devereaux's placement recommendations, but chose not to act. One email sent from a senior case manager to the department director read simply, "He's the judge. We don't question the judge." That email was cited in the governor's public statement calling for wholesale reform. The 2 cooperating social workers received reduced sentences. One was given 3 years. The other received probation and mandatory testimony in related proceedings. The group home administrator who had facilitated access to children was sentenced to 12 years. Gloria Vance, the foster mother whose license had been revoked after she raised concerns, was publicly reinstated. The state issued a formal apology. She regained custody of the 2 children she had lost and was invited to serve on the newly formed Civilian Oversight Panel for Child Welfare. Officer Vanessa Cordero was recognized by the State Attorney General's office for her actions during the traffic stop. She declined all media interviews. A single quote appeared in an internal department memo distributed to every sheriff's office in the state. "I just did what the training says. If something doesn't feel right, you don't drive away from it." The Bodycam footage from Highway 9 was viewed over 4 million times in the weeks following the trial. Legal analysts, child advocacy organizations, and law enforcement training programs dissected it frame by frame. But the moment everyone returned to was the same. A dark highway, a flashlight beam sweeping across the back seat of a Lincoln Continental, 4 children sitting in silence, and a boy who turned his head, looked into the camera mounted on a deputy's chest, and whispered 5 words that broke the case open. "That's not my dad." Without that whisper, Devereaux might still be on the bench. Without Cordero's refusal to defer to a powerful man's title, the children might still be in his reach. Without the Bodycam preserving the truth in a format that could not be denied, rewritten, or buried, the system that protected him might never have been forced to answer for what it allowed. The children are in protective care. They are receiving long-term psychological support. The boy who spoke has not been publicly identified, and will not be. He is reported to be doing well. His name will not appear in this story because he has already done the bravest thing anyone could ask of him. He spoke when silence was safer, and someone listened. This case was brutal, but the case on the right spirals completely out of control.
Don't sit there acting confused. You expect me to believe this is your vehicle?
It is registered to me. You verified that.
Registered doesn't mean earned. Cars like this don't just land in the hands of someone like you without something shady behind it.
Am I being charged with a crime?
No.
At 9:47 on a quiet Sunday morning along Meridian Boulevard in Crestwood, a matte black Lamborghini Urus rolled through a green light at the intersection of Walnut and 5th. The driver signaled, changed lanes, and continued at exactly the posted speed limit. 6 car lengths behind her, Officer Brent Hargrove, 42, a 16-year veteran of the Crestwood Police Department, sat behind the wheel of his patrol cruiser and watched. His dash cam was running, his body camera was active. Both would later confirm what happened next. Hargrove followed the Lamborghini for 6 full blocks. He didn't activate his lights. He didn't run the plates. He just followed, watching, waiting for something he could use. At the 7th block, he hit the sirens. He called it in as a suspicious vehicle, possible stolen, and noted a failure to signal during a lane change. The dash cam would later show the signal blinking clearly, 3 full seconds before the merge. The driver who pulled over without hesitation placed both hands on the steering wheel and waited calmly for the officer to approach was federal judge Geneviève Okafor-Laurent. She was 53 years old, a sitting judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the 4th Circuit, and one of the most respected jurists in the federal system. She was on her way home from visiting her elderly mother across town. She wore a linen blouse, sunglasses pushed up on her head, and no identification that would mark her as anything other than what Hargrove had already decided she was: a black woman driving a car he didn't believe she could own. Officer Brent Hargrove had been with the Crestwood Police Department since he was 26 years old. In that time, he had accumulated 31 civilian complaints, the overwhelming majority filed by Black and Latino residents. The complaints described a pattern that never changed: pretextual stops, aggressive questioning, searches conducted without consent or probable cause, property seized and never returned. Hargrove had earned a nickname in the neighborhoods he patrolled most heavily. Residents called him the Collector. Not because he collected evidence, but because he collected belongings. Cash pulled from wallets during traffic stops, jewelry removed during pat-downs and logged as potential proceeds of criminal activity. Electronics confiscated under civil asset forfeiture statutes that allowed police to take property without ever filing charges. Over the past 5 years alone, Hargrove had seized more than $340,000 in cash and personal property from citizens. Almost none of those seizures led to arrests. Almost none of that property was ever returned. 2 prior cases involving allegations of planted evidence had been quietly settled by the city before reaching trial. Internal Affairs had reviewed his file multiple times and closed every investigation without action. His supervisors described him in evaluations as assertive and proactive. The police union representative, a man Hargrove met for drinks twice a month, had personally intervened to block 3 separate disciplinary recommendations. Younger officers who questioned his methods were told to mind their own calls. Those who pushed further were transferred. Hargrove operated with the confidence of a man who had never once been held accountable. And on this Sunday morning, with his lights flashing behind a Lamborghini Urus on Meridian Boulevard, he had no reason to believe that was about to change. Judge Genevieve Okafor Laurent was not the kind of person who announced herself. She never had been. Her father, Chukwemeka Okafor, came to the United States from Lagos in 1974 with $200 and a work visa. He drove a taxi in Washington, D.C. for 31 years, 6 days a week, often pulling double shifts so his children wouldn't carry the debt he did. Her mother, Ruth Ann Laurent, grew up in Orangeburg, South Carolina, the granddaughter of sharecroppers. She cleaned office buildings at night and took community college classes during the day until her body gave out before her ambition did. Genevieve was the youngest of 3. She earned a full scholarship to Howard University, graduated summa cum laude, and was accepted to Yale Law School, where she was one of 9 Black women in her class. She clerked for a Supreme Court justice. She spent a decade as a federal prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, trying cases involving police brutality, unlawful search and seizure, and systemic discrimination in law enforcement agencies across the Southeast. 9 years ago, she was appointed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. She had since authored or joined rulings in more than a dozen landmark cases involving police misconduct, qualified immunity, and constitutional violations under the 4th and 14th Amendments. Legal scholars described her opinions as surgically precise. Defense attorneys feared her bench. Civil rights lawyers cited her rulings like scripture. None of that was visible on Meridian Boulevard that morning. What Hargrove saw when he looked through that window was a Black woman in a linen blouse sitting behind the wheel of a car he had already decided wasn't hers. And that was all he needed. Hargrove approached the driver's side with his right hand resting on his belt. His body camera captured the angle from his chest. The dash cam recorded the wider frame from the cruiser. Both were rolling. Both would preserve every word of what came next. He didn't greet her, didn't introduce himself. His first words were a demand. "Whose car is this?" Judge Okafor Laurent looked up at him, hands still on the wheel. "It's mine. You have proof of that?" She reached toward the center console slowly, movements deliberate and visible. "My license and registration are right here." Hargrove took the documents and studied them far longer than necessary, flipping the registration back and forth, holding the license up as though comparing the photo to a face he had already decided didn't match the vehicle. He walked back to his cruiser. He ran the plates. The vehicle came back registered to Genevieve Okafor Laurent. The license was valid. No warrants, no flags, nothing. He sat in the cruiser for nearly 4 minutes. Then he got out and walked back to her window. The body camera captured what came next without interruption. Step out of the vehicle. For what reason? Okafor Laurent's voice was steady. I need you to step out. I've provided my documents. Everything is in order. Why am I being asked to exit my car? Hargrove leaned closer. I'm detecting the odor of marijuana coming from inside this vehicle. There was no marijuana in the car. There had never been marijuana in the car. Forensic analysis would later confirm that no trace of any controlled substance existed anywhere in or on the vehicle. But in that moment, on the side of Meridian Boulevard, with no witnesses yet watching and both cameras running, Hargrove had just manufactured the one claim he believed would give him the authority to go further. And he intended to. Step out, now! Judge Okafor Laurent opened the door slowly. She placed one foot on the pavement, then the other. She stood upright, hands visible at her sides, and spoke clearly enough for every microphone in range to capture it. I am complying with your order under protest. I do not consent to any search of my person or my vehicle. Hargrove didn't acknowledge a single word. He took her by the arm and moved her to the rear quarter panel of the Lamborghini, positioning her against the car with both palms flat on the matte black paint. He patted her down with hands that moved too slowly and pressed too hard, running his palms along her sides, her waist, her pockets. She stood motionless, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the street ahead. A second patrol unit had already arrived. Officer Nolan Fitch, 29, 5 years on the force, stepped out and approached. Hargrove jerked his head toward the open driver's door. Toss it. Fitch hesitated. His eyes moved from the woman standing composed against a $250,000 vehicle to the registration document sitting clean on the hood. He opened his mouth like he was going to ask something, then didn't. He reached into the car. They emptied her purse across the hood. Wallet, reading glasses, a leather planner, a tube of hand cream, receipts. They opened the glove compartment and pulled out the owner's manual and insurance papers. They lifted the floor mats. They searched the center console, the door pockets, the trunk. In the back seat, they found a small zippered bag containing her mother's prescription medications. Hargrove unzipped it, spread the bottles across the leather seat, read the labels one by one, then left them scattered where they fell. They found nothing illegal, because there was nothing illegal to find. Across the street, in a second-floor window of a brick colonial, a woman named Celeste Gerard had been watching since the lights first flashed. Her phone was recording. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Hargrove stood in the middle of the road, feet apart, hands on his hips, staring at the open doors of a vehicle that had given him nothing. No drugs, no weapons, no contraband. No justification for a single thing he had done in the last 20 minutes. The body camera on his chest kept recording. He turned back toward Judge Okafor Laurent, still standing where he had placed her, palms flat against the side of the car, and what came out of his mouth next would be replayed in federal court, in news broadcasts, in training seminars, and in living rooms across the country. Let me ask you something. A woman like you, driving something like this, how does that happen? She said nothing. He stepped closer. Did your boyfriend buy this for you? Some rapper? Some dealer? Because I've been doing this a long time, and cars like this don't end up with people like you unless something dirty is going on. His voice was casual, almost conversational, as if he were stating something so obvious it barely needed saying. This car costs more than you'd make in 10 years, so I'm going to ask you again. Where did the money come from? Okafor Laurent turned her head slightly. Am I free to leave? Hargrove's expression hardened. You'll leave when I decide you can leave, not before. Angle. A second neighbor, 2 houses down. Angle. A second neighbor, 2 houses down, had stepped onto his porch and started filming. A passing driver slowed at the intersection, window down, phone raised. 3 cameras were now recording from 3 directions, and the body camera on Hargrove's chest made 4. None of them would miss a word of what had already been said, and Hargrove, standing in the middle of Meridian Boulevard, with his chest out and his badge catching the morning sun, had no idea that every syllable was building the federal case that would end him. There was a moment, captured clearly on the body camera, where Judge Okafor Laurent's eyes moved from Hargrove's face to the badge on his chest and then back again. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but lawyers who reviewed the footage later would describe it as the moment she made her decision. She could have ended it right there. One sentence. I'm a federal judge on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. The stop would have collapsed on itself. Hargrove would have stammered. Fitch would have frozen. Apologies would have tumbled out, fast and hollow and desperate. She knew that. She also knew exactly what that would mean. It would mean that the Constitution applied differently depending on who you were. That rights were not rights at all, but privileges extended to people with titles and revoked from everyone else. That a black woman driving a Lamborghini deserved to be searched and humiliated, unless she could prove she was important enough to be left alone. So she said nothing about who she was. Instead, she asked for his badge number. Hargrove stared at her. What? Your badge number. I'd like it, please. He recited it with reluctance, each digit clipped and hard. She repeated it back to confirm. Then she asked him to spell his last name. He sneered. Hargrove. Slow enough for you? She didn't react. She filed it the way she filed everything, with precision, without emotion, with the patience of a woman who had spent 9 years on the federal bench, weighing testimony, dissecting evidence, and holding powerful men accountable when they believed they were untouchable. She had judged cases exactly like this one. She had read transcripts full of the same language, the same pretexts, the same arrogance dressed in a uniform. Now she was standing inside one, palms flat against her own car, living every word she had ever read in a case file. Hargrove keyed his radio. I need a K-9 unit at my location, Meridian Boulevard, south of 5th. Judge Okafor Laurent looked at him but said nothing. The temperature that morning was already 87 degrees and climbing. She was standing on asphalt in direct sunlight with no shade and no water. In the backseat of the Lamborghini, her mother's prescription medications sat in the zippered bag Hargrove had torn open, bottles scattered across dark leather that was absorbing every degree of heat the sun could give it. 2 of those prescriptions were temperature sensitive. The labels said so clearly. Hargrove had read those labels. He didn't care. The K-9 unit arrived 28 minutes later. Officer Dean Sutcliffe, 36, stepped out with a Belgian Malinois on a short lead. The dog circled the vehicle once, then again. It showed no alert behavior. No sit, no paw, no change in breathing or posture. Sutcliffe looked at Hargrove. I'm not getting anything. Hargrove shook his head. He paused near the rear quarter. That's a partial alert. Go again. Sutcliffe glanced at Fitch. Fitch looked at the ground. Neither of them believed what Hargrove had just said, and the body camera caught the look between them clearly. Sutcliffe walked the dog around a 3rd time. Nothing. Hargrove ordered the vehicle searched again. Fitch opened the rear hatch and moved things that had already been moved. Sutcliffe stood to the side, leash in hand, silent. Fitch spoke quietly, barely audible on the body camera audio, but recovered during forensic enhancement. Maybe we should wrap this up. Hargrove didn't turn around. Shut up and finish. By the time it was over, 57 minutes had passed since the initial stop. 57 minutes for a lane change that was executed legally. 57 minutes that produced no citation, no charge, no arrest, and no apology. Hargrove handed back her documents without a word. Judge Okafor Laurent gathered the medication bottles from the back seat, now warm to the touch. She noticed the scuff on the driver's seat leather where Fitch had leaned his tool belt. She sat down, closed the door, and pulled away from the curb at exactly the speed limit. She did not look back. Hargrove watched the Lamborghini disappear down Meridian Boulevard and returned to his cruiser. He logged the stop as a routine traffic contact with no further action. He had no idea that the woman he had just spent an hour degrading would by morning have the full weight of the federal government bearing down on him with the force his badge had never prepared him for. At 7:15 Monday morning, Judge Geneviève Okafor Laurent sat at her desk in her home office with a legal pad, a pen, and a phone. She did not call the Crestwood Police Department. She did not file a civilian complaint. She did not leave a message with Internal Affairs. She called the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. She identified herself by name and title. She provided her case number from the Fourth Circuit, her judicial appointment reference, and a detailed oral account of the stop, timed to the minute, citing the specific constitutional violations by amendment and clause. She then called the FBI field office and made the same report. Then the Office of Inspector General. Each call was precise, measured, and without emotion. She spoke the way she wrote opinions. Facts first, law second, conclusions last. By 8:30 a.m., she had submitted a written account, 7 pages, single-spaced, with timestamps drawn from her own memory and cross-referenced against the time she had noted on the dashboard clock during the stop. She requested preservation of all footage, Hargrove's dash cam, his body camera, Fitch's body camera, and the K-9 unit's records. She requested Hargrove's personnel file, his stop history, and his civil asset forfeiture records. Then she made one more call. Not to an agency, but to a civil rights litigation firm with a national reputation for police misconduct cases. She told them she was not calling for herself. She was calling because she wanted to know how many other people Brent Hargrove had done this to. People who didn't have a law degree. People who didn't have a title. People who didn't have the ability to make the calls she had just made. By the time Judge Okafor Laurent closed her legal pad, the machinery of federal accountability was already turning, and Officer Brent Hargrove was on his way to work with no idea that his name was now in 3 federal databases. The footage arrived at the DOJ Civil Rights Division by secure transfer on Tuesday. Investigators reviewed every second from 4 separate sources. The dashcam came first. It showed the Lamborghini Urus approaching the intersection of Walnut and 5th, signaling a lane change 3 full seconds before merging and completing the maneuver cleanly within the posted speed limit. The failure to signal that Hargrove had used as his pretext for the stop had never occurred. The body camera footage was worse. It captured Hargrove's tone from the first word, the immediate demand to know whose car it was, the prolonged examination of documents that were in perfect order. Every one of them. Women like you don't. Every one of them. Women like you don't come by cars like this. Did your boyfriend buy it for you? This car costs more than you'd make in 10 years. Audio forensic enhancement recovered something the body camera microphone had barely caught in real time. Early in the stop, before Fitch had arrived, Hargrove had leaned toward his radio and whispered, "Bet you anything this thing's stolen or bought with dirty money. Look at her." The K-9 unit's records collapsed the marijuana claim entirely. Officer Sutcliffe, under questioning, admitted the dog had shown no genuine alert behavior at any point during the search. When asked about the partial alert Hargrove had claimed, Sutcliffe paused for a long time before answering. "There was no alert. I told him that. He said to go again." Investigators then pulled Hargrove's stop records. In the past 18 months, he had conducted 214 traffic stops. 178 of them, over 83%, involved Black or Latino drivers. Civil asset forfeiture filings showed he had seized more than $340,000 in cash and personal property during that same period. Charges were filed in fewer than 6% of those seizures. The rest of the property simply disappeared into the system, and the people it belonged to never saw it again. The investigators looked at the numbers, looked at the footage, and understood they were no longer investigating a single traffic stop. They were looking at a career. They arrived at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday without warning. 2 FBI special agents and 3 DOJ Civil Rights Division investigators walked through the front entrance of the Crestwood Police Department, carrying federal subpoenas and a preservation order for all digital records. They did not ask for a meeting. They served the documents at the front desk and requested immediate access to the Chief of Police. Chief Raymond Beckett, 58, came out of his office expecting a courtesy visit. His expression changed within 30 seconds. The subpoenas demanded Hargrove's complete personnel file, all 31 complaint records, every internal affairs investigation and its disposition, body camera server access logs going back 3 years, and all internal communications referencing Hargrove's stop activity, forfeiture records, or civilian complaints. Beckett's first instinct was to push back. He began asking about jurisdiction, about process, about whether the department's legal counsel should be present. The lead FBI agent let him finish, then told him the victim of the stop was a sitting judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. The color left Beckett's face, but the agent continued before the silence could settle. Her title is not why we're here. We're here because the evidence shows a pattern in practice of civil rights violations by an officer your department has protected for 16 years. That's a federal matter, regardless of who he pulled over last Sunday. Hargrove was on patrol when the call came through ordering him back to the station. He was met in the parking lot by a captain who told him to hand over his badge, his firearm, and his cruiser keys. He was escorted inside, placed in an administrative office, and informed he was suspended pending a federal investigation. His face went tight. He asked what this was about. Nobody answered. Fitch was pulled from duty the same morning and placed on administrative leave. The union representative, Victor Spano, arrived within the hour, demanding to know what was happening. An FBI agent took him aside and said one sentence that ended the conversation. "Obstruction of a federal civil rights investigation is a felony, Mr. Spano. I suggest you cooperate fully and advise your client to do the same." Spano said nothing further. For the first time in 16 years, the machinery that had shielded Brent Hargrove went completely silent. 3 weeks later, the United States Attorney's Office for the District filed a federal indictment against Officer Brent Hargrove. The charges were severe: deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242, conspiracy to commit civil rights violations, filing false police reports, illegal search and seizure in violation of the Fourth Amendment. The indictment ran 34 pages. It did not focus solely on the stop of Judge Genevieve Okafor-Laurent. It detailed a pattern spanning years. 47 identified victims, predominantly Black and Latino, subjected to unlawful stops, fabricated pretexts, warrantless searches, and civil asset forfeitures carried out without probable cause. It described a system in which complaints were filed and buried. Supervisors looked the other way, and one officer operated with impunity because no one above him had the will to stop him. Officer Nolan Fitch was offered cooperation terms within days of the indictment. He accepted. In his testimony to federal investigators, Fitch described what Hargrove was like between stops, the language he used in the cruiser when the body cameras were off, the casual way he selected targets based on race and vehicle type, the comments about certain neighborhoods and certain people that had become so routine, Fitch stopped registering them as unusual. He described an unwritten culture within the department where aggressive stop numbers were rewarded, where complaints from minority residents were treated as the cost of doing business, and where officers who raised concerns were quietly reassigned or frozen out of advancement. Fitch's testimony led investigators to two supervisors, Sergeant Dale Womack and Lieutenant Ira Fontaine, both of whom were named in the indictment as unindicted co-conspirators. Internal emails showed Womack had received at least 9 forwarded complaints about Hargrove over 4 years and had closed every one without action. Fontaine had signed off on Hargrove's forfeiture paperwork dozens of times, without once questioning the absence of corresponding charges. Neither man had been careless. They had been deliberate, and the federal government intended to prove it. The trial began on a Tuesday in a federal courtroom 40 miles from Crestwood. Hargrove's defense attorney opened with a simple argument. His client was a veteran officer who followed his training, trusted his instincts, and made judgment calls the way officers did every day. He called it experience. He asked the jury to consider the pressures of the job. The prosecution responded by pressing play. The body camera footage from the Lamborghini stop ran first. The jury watched from Hargrove's own perspective as he fabricated a marijuana claim, emptied a purse across the hood, scattered prescription medication across a back seat, and told a woman standing against her own car that people like her didn't come by vehicles like this. Then prosecutors played footage from 6 other stops, different days, different drivers. The language was nearly identical. The tactics were the same. Each stop involved a black or Latino driver. Each produced no charges. 12 of Hargrove's other victims took the stand. A retired canine training supervisor testified that no alert behavior had occurred during the Lamborghini search, and that the partial alert, Hargrove claimed, did not exist in any recognized training program. A use of force expert testified that every element of the search violated the Fourth Amendment. Judge Okafor Laurent took the stand last. She was introduced by name alone. To have a stranger's hands press her. To have a stranger's hands press her against her own vehicle. What it felt like to watch her mother's medication scattered across hot leather by a man who never once considered she might be telling the truth. She described the moment Hargrove told her the car cost more than she'd make in 10 years, and she paused. Not for effect, because the memory required it. The jury deliberated for less than a day, guilty on every count. The sentencing hearing was held 3 weeks later. Hargrove stood in a dark suit, no badge, no firearm. The presiding judge, the Honorable Catherine Shao, addressed him directly. Officer Hargrove, you did not merely break the law, you weaponized it. You used the authority entrusted to you to target, humiliate, and rob citizens of their constitutional rights based on the color of their skin. You did this repeatedly, systematically, and without remorse. She sentenced him to 7 years in federal prison, among the harshest sentences for a civil rights violation by a law enforcement officer in the circuit's recent history. He was remanded immediately. Fitch received a suspended sentence for cooperation, but was permanently barred from law enforcement. His silence on Meridian Boulevard had cost him everything his testimony couldn't buy back. The Crestwood Police Department entered a federal consent decree, independent civilian oversight, mandatory demographic data on all stops and forfeitures, published quarterly, comprehensive retraining with annual testing, complete overhaul of internal affairs, including independent review of all racial bias complaints. Sergeant Womack and Lieutenant Fontaine were forced to resign. Chief Beckett announced his retirement 2 days later without public comment. The civil lawsuit was filed on behalf of Judge Okafor Laurent and 38 other identified victims. The city's attorneys reviewed the footage, the stop data, the forfeiture records, the emails, and the federal conviction. Settlement negotiations lasted less than a month. The final amount was $6.4 million, divided among victims according to severity and documentation. The money would matter, but what mattered more was the record. It could not be sealed, it could not be buried, and it could not be undone. Judge Genevieve Okafor Laurent returned to the bench without ceremony. She did not give interviews. She did not appear on panels about her experience. She let the record speak because the record was comprehensive and the record was permanent. But 6 months after the trial, she accepted an invitation to deliver the keynote address at a national legal conference on constitutional policing. She stood at the podium in the same composure she had carried on Meridian Boulevard and said what she had carried quietly since that Sunday morning. I did not tell that officer who I was, because who I am should not determine whether my rights are respected. The Constitution does not have a VIP lane. The room was silent for a long moment before the applause began. She used a portion of her civil settlement to fund a legal clinic specializing in representation for victims of discriminatory traffic stops, people who had been searched, seized from, humiliated, and sent on their way without charges, without apology, and without anyone to call on Monday morning. The clinic opened in a small office 12 minutes from Meridian Boulevard. Hargrove served his sentence in a federal facility where his former profession made every day harder than the last. He never issued a public apology. He never acknowledged wrongdoing. He maintained until the end that he had been doing his job. After the settlement. Traffic stop racial. After the settlement. Traffic stop racial disparities across the department had dropped by 61%. Complaints of discriminatory enforcement had fallen by more than half. Officers now recorded justification for every stop in writing, and every recording was subject to independent review. In the Oversight Board's office, mounted on the wall behind the conference table, hung a single framed image. It was a still captured from Hargrove's own body camera. It showed Judge Okafor Laurent standing beside her matte black Lamborghini Urus, palms flat against the paint, chin level, eyes forward. Beneath it, a single line in plain black type. The law applies to everyone, including those who enforce it. If you think this situation was bad, wait until you see what happens in the case on the right-hand side.
I am a federal judge. You can confirm that
Save it.
immediately.
Credentials don't put you above investigation.
I am asking you to verify before escalating this.
You think because you've got a title and a big house in this neighborhood that nobody's going to...
At 5:47 a.m. on Saturday, March 1st, 2026, 12 armed Homeland Security investigations agents in full tactical gear executed a no-knock raid on a quiet residential home in Silver Spring, Maryland. A flashbang grenade shattered the living room window before the front door had even been touched. Then came the battering ram. The door splintered inward on the first hit. Agents flooded the hallway shouting commands, boots shaking the floor hard enough to knock framed photos off the walls. Barbara Okuosa Adeyemi was pulled from her bed in pajamas and thrown face first onto the hallway floor. Her wrists were zip-tied behind her back before she could finish a sentence. Down the hall, her 16-year-old daughter Rosaline was forced to the ground at gunpoint in her own bedroom. Bodycam footage would later show the girl's face, frozen in terror, a rifle barrel inches from her head. In the next room, 11-year-old Namdi stood paralyzed against his bookshelf, tears streaming down his face, a dark stain spreading down his pajama pants. Barbara's voice cut through the chaos, steady despite the pressure on her spine. "I'm a federal judge. I'm a sitting United States federal judge." The agent kneeling on her back didn't flinch. "Sure you are." Senior Agent Craig Loomis stood in the doorway of the bedroom, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold like a man observing routine work. He said nothing. He didn't need to. He had authorized every second of this. Craig Loomis was 46 years old, with 18 years in federal law enforcement and a career built almost entirely on post-9/11 fear. He had made his name running counterintelligence operations that targeted immigrant communities and black professionals with tenuous or outright fabricated links to foreign governments. 7 of his previous operations had collapsed before reaching trial due to lack of evidence. Not one of those failures resulted in discipline. 2 former colleagues had filed internal complaints alleging Loomis manufactured evidence and pressured informants into giving false statements. Both complaints landed on the desk of Supervisory Special Agent Donna Kessler, his section chief. Both were dismissed. Kessler had co-signed nearly every major warrant Loomis had pursued over the past 6 years. Among his peers, Loomis was known for what supervisors politely called big swings, high-profile raids designed to generate press attention and justify budget lines, rather than produce convictions. He had been chasing a promotion to Assistant Special Agent in Charge for 2 years. He needed a headline case. And when Barbara Okuosa Adeyemi's name surfaced during a routine intelligence sweep, Loomis decided she was it. Judge Barbara Okuosa Adeyemi was born in Baltimore to Nigerian immigrant parents who had come to the United States with nothing but education and discipline. Her father taught biology at a community college. Her mother worked as a hospital administrator. Barbara earned her undergraduate degree from Spelman College, then her law degree from Harvard, where she graduated in the top 5% of her class. She clerked for a federal appellate judge on the 4th Circuit, then spent 8 years as a prosecutor at the Department of Justice, specializing in national security cases, the very field Craig Loomis now worked in. 4 years ago, she was appointed to the federal bench for the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. Senate confirmed. Respected across the legal profession for her fairness, her sharp intellect, and her willingness to check government overreach in surveillance and civil liberties cases. She was one of only a handful of black women serving as federal district judges in the entire country. Her husband, Dr. Chukwuemeka Okwuosa Adeyemi, a cardiologist, had passed away 2 years earlier from pancreatic cancer. Since then, Barbara had been raising Rosaline and Nnamdi alone, balancing a demanding caseload with school pickups, Sunday church, and the quiet grief of a household that still had his reading glasses on the nightstand. She was deeply private, deeply principled, and deeply rooted in her community. She was also, in every measurable way, exactly the kind of person the system was supposed to protect. Instead, the system sent Craig Loomis. 3 months before the raid, Loomis flagged Barbara's name during a broad-sweep intelligence review of individuals with what the agency internally labeled connections to nations of concern. Her connection was this. Her late father, a biology professor who had died in 2016, had traveled to Tehran once in 1994 to attend an academic medical conference. That single trip, over 30 years ago, by a dead man, became the seed of the entire case. Loomis built an affidavit alleging that Barbara maintained undisclosed foreign contacts with Iranian intelligence assets. He cited wire transfers she had sent to elderly family members in Lagos as financial activity consistent with covert channels. He pointed to her professional travel to The Hague for a judicial conference, a trip organized by the U.S. State Department, and described it as indicative of clandestine meetings with foreign operatives. Every claim in the affidavit was either a deliberate distortion or an outright fabrication. No corroborating intelligence existed from the CIA, the NNSA, or the FBI. No other agency had flagged her name. No confidential informant had provided testimony. Loomis submitted the warrant application to Magistrate Judge Howard Pruitt, a 61-year-old jurist with a reputation for moving fast through his docket. Pruitt signed the warrant after a 9-minute review. He asked 0 questions. He requested no supporting documentation beyond the affidavit itself. And with that signature, 12 armed agents were authorized to break down the door of a sitting federal judge and drag her from her bed in front of her children. For 3 hours and 14 minutes, agents moved through every room of Barbara Okwuosa Adeyemi's home, with the efficiency of men who believed they were untouchable. Bodycam footage from multiple agents would later document what they seized. Laptops from the home office, cell phones from the kitchen counter and both children's bedrooms, family photo albums pulled from a living room shelf, Barbara's judicial case files, binders and folders containing active federal proceedings, carried out in open boxes without covers or seals, her children's tablets, financial records from a filing cabinet in the hallway, her late husband's medical files, still kept in a drawer beside his side of the bed, and a box of personal letters her father had written to her mother from Nigeria over the course of 40 years, the same letters Loomis had described in his affidavit as coded communications. Barbara sat zip-tied in a kitchen chair the entire time, still in pajamas, watching agents dismantle her home around her. She asked 4 times to call her attorney. Each time she was told the request would be processed later. She asked 3 times for her children to be brought to her, denied without explanation. Down the hall, Rosalind sat in her parents' bedroom with an agent by the door, sobbing, asking over and over if her mother was being arrested. No one answered her. In his own room, Nnamdi sat on the floor with his back against the bed, guarded by an armed agent in tactical gear, clutching a stuffed bear his father had given him. He did not speak. He did not move. Loomis personally entered Barbara's home office and began reading through her judicial case files. When a younger agent standing nearby asked quietly whether they should be handling court documents, Loomis did not hesitate. "She's not a judge today. She's a suspect." 3 minutes after the first flashbang shattered Barbara's living room window, Bill Tavares was standing on his porch across the street in a bathrobe and slippers, phone raised, recording. Tavares was 68 years old, a retired firefighter with 30 years of service and the kind of instinct that told him when something was deeply wrong. He had seen the tactical vehicles pull onto the block at 5:44 a.m. He had watched a dozen agents in helmets and body armor pour out and stack up along the front of the house. And when the grenade went off and the door came down, he pressed record. Over the next 2 hours, his phone captured everything visible from the street. Agents moving in and out carrying boxes, evidence bags clearly containing children's electronics, small tablets and laptops sealed in clear plastic. A moment, 53 minutes into the footage, where an agent walking toward a vehicle held up a framed family photograph and said something to a colleague that made both of them laugh. Tavares caught the moment. Rosalind's face appeared briefly in a second-floor window, tears visible even at distance, before an agent pulled the curtain shut from inside. He walked toward the perimeter once and asked an agent what was happening. He was told to return to his residence immediately. He stepped back, but kept recording. He did not go inside. That evening, sitting in his kitchen with the footage still on his phone, Tavares told a reporter something he would repeat in every interview that followed. "I spent 30 years running into burning buildings. I've seen houses raided for drugs. I've seen bad situations. But I have never in my life seen anything like what they did to that woman and those kids. And I knew right then somebody needed to see this." At 9:15 a.m., 3 hours and 28 minutes after the first agent crossed her threshold, Barbara Okuwosa Adeyemi was finally permitted one phone call. She dialed Obiora Nwankwo, her attorney and one of her closest friends, a constitutional law specialist who had known her since their years together at Harvard. Bodycam footage from the agent standing nearest to the kitchen captured the call. Barbara's voice was controlled, measured, almost clinical, the voice of a woman trained to function under pressure. But the camera also captured what her voice did not betray. Tears running down both cheeks, her jaw tight, her zip-tied hands trembling against the kitchen table. "They broke into my house. They terrorized my children. They are calling me an Iranian spy. I need you here now." Nwankwo arrived in 40 minutes. He walked through the damaged front door in a suit, briefcase in hand, and identified himself immediately as counsel for Judge Okuwosa Adeyemi. Loomis, standing in the living room reviewing a stack of seized documents, barely looked up. Nwankwo stepped closer and spoke clearly enough for every body cam in the room to record it. "My client is a sitting United States federal district judge for the District of Columbia. You have seized active judicial case files from her home office. That is an unconstitutional violation of the separation of powers and judicial independence." The room went quiet. Agent Bryce Dillingham, standing near the hallway, looked at Loomis. 2 agents near the front door exchanged a glance. Loomis's expression did not change, but his hand stopped moving over the papers in front of him. "We'll verify that," he said. Nwankwo's response was immediate. "You should have verified it before you put a flashbang through her window." Loomis stepped into the backyard and called his section chief, Supervisory Special Agent Donna Kessler. He kept his voice low. Kessler ran the name through the Federal Judiciary Personnel Database. The confirmation came back in under 2 minutes. Barbara Okuwosa Adeyemi, confirmed sitting judge, United States District Court for the District of Columbia. Appointed by the President of the United States. Senate confirmed. Active caseload of over 60 pending federal cases. The ambient audio from a body cam still recording in the kitchen picked up Kessler's voice through the phone speaker, tight and clipped. "Craig, what have you done?" Loomis said nothing for several seconds. Then he walked back inside and told his team to begin wrapping up. He did not apologize to Barbara. He did not order her zip ties removed immediately. He did not instruct agents to return the judicial case files. Instead, he stepped outside again, pulled out his personal cell phone, and made a second call off Bodycam. No record exists of who he called or what was said. When he returned to the kitchen, he addressed Nwankwo with the flat tone of a man still trying to control a situation that had already left his hands. "The investigation is ongoing. Seized materials will be reviewed and returned if appropriate." Nwankwo was already standing, his briefcase open, a legal pad filled with notes. He looked directly at Loomis, his voice steady and precise. "You have just raided a federal judge's home on fabricated evidence, seized constitutionally protected judicial files, and terrorized her children. This is not going to be reviewed. This is going to be investigated, but not by you. At approximately 10 a.m., more than 4 hours after the raid began, an agent finally cut the zip ties from Barbara Okwosa Adeyemi's wrists. The plastic had left deep red grooves in her skin. She did not rub them. She stood, walked to the hallway, and asked for her children. Nnamdi was brought to her first. The 11-year-old crossed the kitchen at a run and wrapped both arms around her waist so tightly she had to brace herself against the counter. He did not let go for nearly 20 minutes. He did not speak. Rosalind came next, led by an agent she refused to look at. She sat down in a kitchen chair, folded her hands in her lap, and stared at the wall. She said nothing. Her eyes were dry and distant in a way that unsettled Nwankwo more than the tears had. The house looked like it had been torn apart by people who did not care what they broke. Furniture was overturned, drawers had been pulled out and emptied onto floors. Closets stood open with clothes dragged from hangers. Her late husband's study, the room she had kept exactly as he left it, had been ransacked. His books pulled from shelves, his desk drawers dumped. In the upstairs hallway, a framed photograph of her parents' wedding lay face down on the carpet. The glass cracked in a long diagonal line. Barbara walked through every room with Nwankwo beside her, documenting the damage with her phone. She did not cry again. Her voice was flat, precise, cataloging each violation like evidence. They took the kids' laptops. They took my case files. They took the letters my father wrote to my mother. By 11 a.m., Nwankwo was on the phone with the chief judge of the D.C. District Court. By noon, the Judiciary's administrative office had been formally notified. By 2 p.m., a written complaint had been filed with the Department of Justice, Office of the Inspector General. By evening, 3 United States senators had been quietly briefed by senior judicial officials. The machinery of accountability had begun to move. But inside the house, Nnamdi was still holding on to his mother, and Rosalind had not said a word. On the morning of March 2, 2026, Bill Tavares sent his footage to a reporter at a local television station. He had not slept. By midday, the story was everywhere. Every major outlet ran some version of the same headline, and each one landed harder than the last. Homeland Security raids federal judge's home, calls her Iranian spy. Black federal judge zip-tied in own home during pre-dawn raid. HSI agents seized active judicial case files during raid on judge's home. Legal analysts went on air within hours, calling it one of the most egregious violations of judicial independence in modern American history. Former federal prosecutors described the seizure of active case files as an act that strikes at the foundation of the separation of powers. Civil rights organizations issued formal statements demanding a full federal investigation. The Federal Judges Association, a body that almost never comments publicly on individual cases, released a rare and sharply worded condemnation. Social media erupted. The Bodycam footage had not yet been released, but Tavares' exterior video was viewed over 4 million times by nightfall. One frame in particular spread faster than any other. Agents in tactical gear carrying labeled evidence boxes down the front steps of the house while, in a second-floor window above them, the face of a child was barely visible behind a curtain, mouth open, crying. That image became the defining picture of the case. By late afternoon, HSI leadership moved. Senior Agent Craig Loomis and Supervisory Special Agent Donna Kessler were both placed on administrative leave pending internal review. Magistrate Judge Howard Pruitt, who had signed the warrant after 9 minutes and 0 questions, issued no public comment. But by evening, sources close to the court confirmed he had retained personal legal counsel. The silence from Pruitt's chambers said more than any statement could have. On the afternoon of March 2nd, Obiora Nwankwo filed an emergency motion to unseal and challenge the search warrant affidavit that had authorized the raid on Barbara Okwosa Adeyemi's home. A federal judge in the neighboring District of Maryland granted the motion within hours, citing extraordinary circumstances involving the constitutional integrity of the judiciary. By evening, the affidavit was public, and when legal analysts began reading it on live television, what they found was not an intelligence case. It was a fabrication, held together by distortion and audacity. The Iranian connections that Loomis had cited as the foundation of his case amounted to a single trip to Tehran in 1994 by Barbara's late father, a biology professor who had attended an academic medical conference and had been dead for a decade. The covert financial channels were routine wire transfers, fully documented and tax reported, sent to elderly relatives in Lagos. The clandestine meetings at The Hague referred to Barbara's attendance at a judicial conference organized by the United States State Department itself. She had been formally invited by the federal government to attend the very event Loomis described as evidence of espionage. There was no confidential informant named anywhere in the document, no corroborating intelligence from the CIA, the NSA, or the FBI, no interagency coordination of any kind. Loomis had built the entire case from open-source records, deliberate mischaracterizations of lawful activity, and his own unsubstantiated assertions presented as fact. Former federal prosecutors appeared on every major network, calling it the thinnest affidavit they had ever seen approved by a sitting magistrate. Questions mounted quickly about Magistrate Judge Howard Pruitt's 9-minute review, whether he had read the document at all, and whether the rubber stamping of a warrant this baseless represented its own form of institutional failure. By the evening of March 2nd, the legal filings were done, the phone calls to senators had been made, and the news cycle was burning with her name. But inside the house in Silver Spring, none of that reached the two children trying to sleep in bedrooms that no longer felt safe. Rosalind had spoken fewer than a dozen words since the morning of the raid. She flinched at sudden sounds, the creak of a door, a car engine outside, the neighbor's dog barking. She asked her mother once, quietly, standing in the hallway before bed, "Are they going to come back?" Barbara told her no, but the question hung in the air because Barbara could not promise that with the certainty her daughter needed. Namdi had not slept through the night since March 1st. He had begun wetting the bed again, something he had not done since he was 5 years old. On the night of March 2nd, as Barbara tucked him in, he looked up at her with an expression no 11-year-old should carry and asked, "Did you do something bad, Mama?" Barbara held his face in both hands and told him no. She told him she had done nothing wrong. She told him the people who came to their house had made a mistake. But she could see in his eyes that the answer did not land the way it needed to, because the damage was not about information. It was about what had been taken from him. The belief that his home was a place where nothing could hurt him. After both children were in bed, Barbara closed her bedroom door, sat on the edge of the mattress, and called her sister in Baltimore. Her voice, the same voice that had stayed level through zip ties and interrogation and federal motions, finally broke. "They didn't just raid my house. They stole my children's sense of safety. I don't know how to give it back." A child psychologist who would later evaluate both Rosaline and Namdi would describe their symptoms as consistent with acute trauma disorder. The report would note hypervigilance, sleep disruption, emotional withdrawal, and regressive behavior. It would note that these symptoms had been caused not by an accident or a natural disaster, but by agents of their own government, in their own home, in the dark. As of March 3rd, 2026, the machinery of accountability is turning, but no one has yet been held to account. Multiple investigations are now open simultaneously, each pulling at a different thread of the same catastrophic failure. The Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General has launched a formal probe into Senior Agent Craig Loomis, Agent Bryce Dillingham, Supervisory Special Agent Donna Kessler, and the full approval chain that authorized the warrant. The Department of Justice Inspector General is conducting a separate investigation into whether the raid constituted an obstruction of judicial function, a question with constitutional implications that reach far beyond a single case. The Judicial Conference of the United States, the policymaking body for the entire federal court system, has convened an emergency session focused specifically on the seizure of active case files from a sitting judge's home. In a statement released this morning, the conference called the seizure a direct assault on the independence of the federal judiciary. The FBI has opened a parallel criminal inquiry into whether Loomis fabricated evidence in the affidavit, which, if proven, would constitute a federal crime carrying significant prison time. Congressional leaders from both parties have demanded hearings. Letters have been sent to the DHS Secretary, the Attorney General, and the Director of National Intelligence, requesting full briefings. Loomis, through his attorney, has released a single statement claiming he acted in good faith based on available intelligence. Kessler has not commented publicly. Dillingham has reportedly retained separate counsel and requested to cooperate with investigators. Magistrate Judge Howard Pruitt has been quietly recused from all pending cases on his docket. And the seized judicial files, the active case documents taken from Barbara Okuwosa Adeyemi's home office, have not yet been returned. Among her colleagues on the federal bench, Barbara Okuwosa Adeyemi is described the same way by nearly everyone who knows her work. Principled, thorough, fearless when it matters. Over 4 years on the bench, she built a record that earned respect from prosecutors and defense attorneys alike. But it was her rulings on government surveillance that drew the most attention. She had written multiple opinions pushing back on overreach by federal agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security. She had questioned the scope of warrantless data collection. She had demanded specificity in affidavits where other judges accepted vague language. 2 of her Fourth Amendment opinions had been cited by appellate courts as models of constitutional reasoning. She had, in short, done exactly what a federal judge is supposed to do. She held power accountable. And now, legal commentators across the country are asking the question openly. Was this really an intelligence failure? Or was it retaliation? Was a black woman who dared to check federal authority made into a target by the very apparatus she had held to account? No direct evidence of retaliation has emerged. Not yet. But the investigation is ongoing, and the coincidence has not gone unnoticed by anyone paying attention. Barbara herself has not spoken publicly. She has not appeared on camera. She has not given interviews. Through Obira Nwankwo, she released a single written statement on the evening of March 2nd. It read, "I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. On March 1st, agents of the federal government broke into my home and violated that Constitution in front of my children. I intend to ensure that every person responsible is held accountable. Not for my sake, but because if they can do this to a federal judge, they can do it to anyone." This story is not finished. As of March 3rd, 2026, no one has been charged. No one has been fired. No one has been arrested. The judicial case files seized from Barbara Okuwosa Adeyemi's home remain in government custody, active federal proceedings handled by agents who had no legal right to touch them. Barbara's children are still not sleeping through the night. Rosaline still flinches when a door closes too hard. Namdi still crawls into his mother's bed before dawn, afraid of the dark in a way he never was before. Craig Loomis is on paid administrative leave, collecting a federal salary from his home, while the woman whose door he broke down tries to explain to an 11-year-old why the people who are supposed to protect them were the ones who came with guns. The investigations are open. The Inspector General is reviewing. The FBI is examining. Congress is demanding answers. But the process is slow, deliberate, and offers no comfort to a family still living in a house with a front door that no longer locks properly and a living room window still boarded up with plywood where a flashbang grenade came through before sunrise on a Saturday morning. The public is watching. The legal community is watching. Civil rights organizations are watching. And somewhere in a quiet house in Silver Spring, Maryland, a federal judge is sitting on the edge of her daughter's bed, smoothing her hair, telling her it is safe to close her eyes, knowing that she cannot yet prove that is true. This is not a story with a resolution. Not yet. But the cameras were rolling. The Bodycam footage exists. The neighbor's video exists. The affidavit is public. The evidence is preserved. And the people responsible have names, badges, and records that are now under a level of scrutiny they never imagined possible. Because when they planned this raid, when they drafted that warrant, when they threw that grenade and broke down that door, they assumed the woman in pajamas on the hallway floor was no one who mattered. They were wrong. This case was disturbing, but the one on the right ends in a way no one expects.